This video will walk you through calculating the predictive interval for a simple regression. The example I'm using can be found under Data Sets, Sales Advertising 3, so Data Sets Chapter 3, and I'm looking at the relationship between advertising and sales. As I increase my advertising expenditures, by how much do sales increase? And here my values are in hundreds. I have run a simple regression, so I have my regression equation for me here. I've also copied and pasted in the equation for my predictive interval. I've created cells for the mean and variance of x because I will need them. Here I'll need the mean, here I'll need the variance of x for my equations. And I've created columns for the individual parts of my equation that I'm going to be doing. So I'm actually doing example 315 on page 111, and I want to estimate a 95% predictive interval for $20,000 worth of advertising expenditures. So my x is going to be 200 since everything's in thousands. I'll use my regression equation to come up with my predicted y. So my regression equation is y equals beta 0 plus 200 times beta on advertising. Next, I calculate my t statistic using the inverse function, t inverse. Degrees of freedom is going to be 0.05 since I want a 95% predictive interval. You always will. And my degrees of freedom right there are 18. Now notice I'm going to have my mean value of x here and my variance of x before I go into my equation, so I'm going to go through and calculate those. So mean is average. My average value of advertising is 299.75. My variance of advertising is 69.9. Okay. So now I have the information necessary to calculate this first part right here, which is going to be from the standard error of the regression onward. So equals standard error of my regression times the square root of, my equation says 1 plus 1 over n, so n here is 20, plus, moving on here, so I have 1 plus 1 over n, I've entered that. Moving on here to the numerator of our fraction. X given is my 200 minus my mean of x squared. Okay. Now I need to put parentheses around all of that. So I tell Excel, do all of this information first. Subtract 200 from my overall mean of x and square that, then take that information and use it to perform the operations on the denominator. So n minus 1, which is 19, or you could do 20 minus 1, you can just enter the cell that says 19. Degrees of freedom total is always n minus 1, times, and now I'm going to multiply it by my variance. So I've closed that parenthesis. Now I need to tell it to close the square root parenthesis and enter. My margin of error now is my entire section here, so it's my t statistic times my standard error of prediction. So t statistic times my standard error of prediction. My lower bound then is my predictive interval minus my margin of error. My upper bound is my predictive interval plus my margin of error. So my 95% predictive interval is that for advertising expenditures of $20,000, my sales will be between $21,307 and $47,826.